It's the photography festival which insists on showing us the images we don't want to see. Visa pour l'image brings together the most urgent, striking and evocative pictures taken by photojournalists from around the world. This year's selection takes us from violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo to creeping chemical contamination and environmental damage via an account of the additives lurking on our dinner plates. Yet in recent years, the plight of migrants around the world has been a recurring theme at the festival, and one photographer has captured a human flow that's made the headlines for years now. Paula Bronstein's exhibition is called Stateless, Stranded and Unwanted, the Rohingya Crisis. She's been documenting the situation in Myanmar and across the border in Bangladesh, where hundreds of thousands of the Muslim minority Rohingya have sought refuge. Now, Paula, thanks for joining us from Perpignan. You've been taking photos in the region for some years now. What was it about the situation in Myanmar which made you feel compelled to cover it?
I'm based in Bangkok, so it's very close by, and I've been covering issues in Myanmar for years. The plight of the Rohingya has always been a compelling story for me. When I went to Bangladesh last year, I'd already had, 4 to 5 years of covering the Rohingya off and on. And stepping into the camps in Myanmar gave me a real perspective of the difficulties and all the problems they faced living in this kind of apartheid system, most of them outside of Sittwe in Western Rakhine State. So, quite a compelling story. I just came from Bangladesh. I basically I was there before I flew here to France. So I got real fresh eyes on the story again.
And as you mentioned, the photos in this exhibition span a period of about 5 or 6 years, starting in 2012, as you mentioned. You went from Myanmar and then into Bangladesh. And given the situation on the ground, how difficult was it for you to get access to these people and these places?
In Myanmar, you had to deal with the authorities, and it was difficult. And sometimes you had to sneak into the camps. Sometimes I was with a journalist visa, sometimes not, depending on the assignment and how quickly I was needed there. But once we got into the camps when we were working in Myanmar, then we had to find a Rohingya translator. So there was lots of things that had to be set up. And each time I went in there, I was focusing on a little bit of a different story, but depending on who I was working with. Each time trying to show, lack of medical care that they had because the Burmese authorities had pushed out the international NGOs, lack of freedom of travel, education, employment, and living in very, very basic camps.
Indeed, your photographs show some really very dramatic scenes. But for you personally, what would you say is the image that you found most arresting when you stumbled upon it first?
Last year, mid-October, was a day when thousands came across by land, and they had started early morning at sunrise, and the flow kept on happening until dusk. And it was really difficult because you had to walk through mud up to your knees in the rice fields that they were walking on. They were coming across just carrying whatever they left their villages with. Pregnant women, elderly were being carried by people. People were helping to carry them. So there was just this epic flow of people, something like I had never seen before.
The UN Human Rights Council has recently called for top generals in Myanmar to be prosecuted for genocide, and now the ICC say they can move ahead with an investigation. Do you think international pressure is going to have an effect eventually, or is the solution elsewhere?
I think it's slowly having more and more pressure. I also think there needs to be sanctions again on Myanmar. I think there needs to be a really strong level of accountability. I mean, the word genocide has been used many times now. And these tribunals take a long time to actually happen. But I think in this case, there's so much evidence. When the UN report came out, it was shortly after the year anniversary. I think they did that to really, really, make more headlines. So it was very well timed. And I think it's just pushing, and it's pushing Aung San Suu Kyi, we all know, and it's been talked about in the news quite a bit, that she's disappointed many in the West, and of course her Nobel Peace Prize, people are saying she should return it. Personally for me, I think she had many opportunities to speak out. Whether her hands are tied or not, she still needed to speak out and say something, and really make a stand on this issue.
2 Reuters journalists were jailed in Myanmar by the authorities, purportedly for crimes related to state secrets. Did you yourself feel endangered when you were covering this story? How did you gauge the level of risk?
Well, I think, first of all, when we talk about the Reuters journalists, they were framed. It's pretty obvious. They were just sentenced to 7 years. The Myanmar government was trying to send a strong message to local media, especially, and really, really clamping down on any kind of media freedom. They're not treating the international media quite the same. I haven't been back to Myanmar that much this year because I was concentrating on Bangladesh, and because they've cut us off so much.
Another story now of exile, courtesy of photojournalist Olivier Jobard, entitled Gorban, Born on a Day Which Doesn't Exist. It documents the experience of the little boy who travelled 12,000 miles from his home in Afghanistan to make a new life here in France. Our reporters went to meet the photographer and his subject.
I met Gorban randomly near the Canal Saint-Martin in Paris. He'd just arrived in France. He was 12 years old. He'd had a horrible journey across 6 countries. I felt for him. It seemed like he wanted to tell his story.
From the streets to shelters to adulthood, Olivier Jobard's photos follow the path of Gorban, a young Afghan who arrived alone in France in 2010. Sent to school at age 14 without speaking a word of French, Gorban made his way by sheer determination through to graduation from vocational school. Today, he's an apprentice laboratory technician, looking back on his former life in photographs.
Education is what I've wanted since I was very small. Even in Afghanistan, I wanted to go to school, but no one wanted to send me. They didn't have the means.
Olivier Jobard captured moments in the life of an adolescent who had been rejected in Afghanistan because he was abandoned by his biological father. At Gorban's request, Olivier became his civil godparent.
What interests me is Gorban and his journey, his life at a given time. There's no need for any additional aesthetic effect. It needs to be as neutral as possible, so that Gorban appears as truly and fairly as possible in the photo.
A translation error in his birth certificate left him with an official birthday, November 31st, that doesn't exist on the calendar. But Gorban has now finally received his French nationality. Last year, for his summer vacation, he wanted to return to Afghanistan. Olivier Jobard went with him, resulting in the most moving photographs of the exhibition, his mother holding her grown son in her arms like a child.
So, Paula, we saw a really strong relationship there between the photographer and his subject. And coming back to the work you were doing in Bangladesh, you were photographing huge crowds of people. How do you concentrate on the individual, on the human story, when faced with this multitude of people?
That's a really good question. And on the day that I spoke about, when there was a really huge land crossing that went on all day, they were allowed to come in and got food and water, and then all of a sudden the authorities pushed a couple hundred of them back again, and many of the Rohingya were crying because they were broken, emotionally broken and exhausted, and had reached, I think, just, they couldn't cope anymore. And so I followed the child, because you asked me how do I do that, and right away I saw a child crying, and I followed her back into the rice fields, and I shot both still pictures and some quick video from my iPhone, because I just felt like how she was reacting really said it so much for me, that just how difficult this journey was. So I don't know, there's just moments where you, as a photographer, it's really important to show compassion towards your subject.
Indeed,
and
yes.
How can you not when you're photographing, human misery on this level? How can you not?
Thank you so much for joining us, Paula. That's all we've got time for this show. We'll leave you with an extract of the web doc which won the Golden Visa Prize. Valentine Van Vie and Olivier Papigny travelled to Burkina Faso to follow the Cogliuego Defence Unit. The jury at the festival saluted their work as an important digital account of the failures of the state services in Burkina Faso. You can see all of the exhibitions at the Visa pour l'Image Festival in Perpignan until September 16th. And for more arts and culture, check out our website or our social media channels. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.